put it behind, built a nice bunker, a real secure facility, and the first thing I do is I punch a big hole in it so anybody in the world can come in and ask the status of credentials or whatever else. In effect, I've created a hole for people to come in and try to attack my infrastructure. The other thing is, as a result of that, everybody's getting it, so anybody can get it anytime they want. Unlike the old credit card model, at least I knew who I was distributing it to. So there's some advantages to this model, however, is that you have established trust. They do know that they're going to a reliable source. Relying parties, people that we want to ask the question, now know that they're getting a response on the status of that credential from a source that they can trust. So that's a good thing. This is what I call Generation 1 validation. The challenges here, of course, is that you have to go back to the same point. So everybody's going back to one choke point. And therefore, it's great in the lab, and it's great when you first start building. And during the issuance stage, this is sometimes the part that gets a little overlooked. People know it has to be done. But the idea of building any credential or identity program is with the hopes that it becomes highly successful. And with highly successful programs comes large-scale adoption. And something like this, where you have a single choke point, you've actually created a new problem down the road for yourself. Now everybody's coming to the same place. All roads lead to Rome, except now there's only one road into Rome. And those are the disadvantages. It doesn't necessarily scale well. In effect, what's happening is that little booklet becomes a really big booklet. Instead of the phone book from your hometown, it's the phone book from Hong Kong. And every time somebody wants to know the status of an identity, that whole phone book gets sent to them. In some of these programs we've seen around the world, that phone book becomes a file that's tens of megabytes large. So every time someone uses their identity, a 10 megabyte file gets sent across the wire. Now, if you've issued millions of credentials, my math isn't that quick, but I'm assuming some of you can start doing the math. That means we have to start building a fatter and fatter pipe, and we're distributing larger and larger files. So that's one of the disadvantages of the traditional model. But establishing trust was critical. So then they moved on to stage 2, Online Certificate Status Protocol, OCSP. This model addressed the sending of the book. Now, instead of having to send one book every time, a full book every time someone asks the status of a credential, I can actually just send the answer. Is Antonio's certificate good? Yes, it is. Quick and simple. So it addressed the speed of the individual certificate response, but it didn't necessarily address some of the reliability issues, because we're still going back to one or two primary choke points. In other words, you've still got to go back to the central authority. You still have that hole in your infrastructure that the whole world has to come through to get that answer. So we're getting close to addressing all the challenges around validation. So we take it one step further in what's called true distributed validation. And now, instead of everything going back to a central choke point, you actually have the ability to talk to the authority and pre-generate all the answers, because out at the end point, we know there's only so many credentials they're going to ask about. We know exactly how many they are. As the issuer of those credentials, we've designed policies so we know where all the credentials are. We know how many. We know what's been revoked. And therefore, we know all the possible yeses or nos to, is this certificate, is this digital identity revoked or not? And we know that ahead of time. So we have the ability to actually continuously pre-generate those answers and distribute them in a manner that's consistent with the usage patterns that we'll see as those certificates start getting used for applications in different locations. Typically, it starts, and I did make a note here, standards-based, RFC 2560, and it's important to note that because OCSP is a standard that applications utilize. Very common applications that we're aware of, Adobe, for example, is OCSP compliant. So deploying standards-based applications means that they will be able to use your digital identities as part of the programs you roll out. Web-based applications that typically host citizen programs that are used in the national IDs. Typically, we have our citizens coming in through portals, so they have an ability to present their electronic identity to that application. The application can then verify that that credential is real, it's not been revoked. Now, starting with the internet, but as you move into the application layer, you can actually move this distributed model closer and closer to those individuals. So as you put it in different regions, different states, you can actually move this validation information closer and closer to the individuals. This starts to address the other challenges that come with any large-scale adoption. So I'm kind of talking generic because it isn't necessarily just about citizen ID. This applies to corporate programs as well. As you have large-scale adoption, the closer the information about status is, the closer the answer is to the applications, to the users, to the relying parties, the faster your applications are going to run. So going back to that end user experience, which is so critical in any program, whether that's citizen ID or a banking application, it's absolutely critical that the perception on the part of the individual is that, hey, this just works. It just works. And it has to be fast. Our responsibility to them is trustworthiness, speed, and reliability. And therefore, they'll be able to utilize the identities and credentials for the programs that we put in place with them without even understanding what the underlying security model is that we put in place, the investment we've made in making sure that it's always available. They only know when it doesn't work. When it does work, nobody says thank you, but they sure ring the helpline when it doesn't work, don't they? I'll take that as a yes, I'm sure.